All right, so we're going to go through this simple interest investigation. So hopefully you've tried to go through whatever parts you can by yourself, and then whatever you can't get, we'll go through those. So I'll just go through this, some parts fairly quickly, because hopefully you've read through it. So we're going to find out what simple interest is and what kind of formulas we can use with it. And we're going to look at first the idea of borrowing money. So money is not free to borrow. The bank's not just going to give it to you and not expect some sort of return on that money. And so different places will charge different amounts, but the usual way is we say a certain percent every year. That's going to be maybe how much you're going to have to pay for that money. And that amount is what we call interest. So let's say you borrow $1,000 from the bank. Let's say Alex, he's wanting to borrow $1,000. And the bank says, okay, we'll do that if you give us 10% interest every year. So how much would it actually cost him to borrow that money for 1 year? So what we want to do is we want to determine 10% of 1,000. So to determine 10% of 1,000, well, what we need to do is we need to turn 10% into a decimal. So as a decimal, it's 0.10. Okay, once we have it as a decimal, we now want to, in order to do 10% of 1,000, you just do 0.10 and multiply that by 1,000. And if you do that multiplication, you should get 100. So in total, it costs $100 to borrow that $1,000. So in a sense, in the end, once you've borrowed that money initially, a year later the bank comes asking for their money, you're gonna end up giving them back $1,100. So that original $1,000 borrowed plus the $100 of interest. So I'll just add that here. 1,000 plus the $100 equals 1,100. All right. What would happen if you looked at more than 1 year? So that was just 1 year of interest. If we're using what we call simple interest, well, that amount of interest we just calculated, that's just going to be added on year by year by year by year. So you owe $100 the first year, you owe another $100, so $200 if you did it in 2 years, and you could just keep doing that over and over again. So let's take a look at some examples where it's not just 1 year. So you're paying the same amount of interest every year. So that's going to be the key. So what if Alex decided to borrow $1,000 for 5 years? Again, this time at 10% simple interest. So again, what we could do is we know for 1 year, from above, for 1 year, it was $100 interest. And if we're doing it for 5 years now, well, in a sense, we're just going to be paying that 5 times over. So 5 times 100 is going to equal to $500. And then in 5 years' time, you'd have to give them back $500 plus the original loan amount. Okay, what if let's do a different interest rate for a different length of time. So we're looking at 6% simple interest for 7 years. So first of all, we just need to know what would that be for a single year. So 6%, let's turn that into a decimal, so that'd be 0.06. And now we want to do 0.06 of 1,000. So times 1,000. And that will give you, if you do the multiplication, $60. So it'll say you're basically paying $60 every year. We're doing this for 7 years. So what you're going to do is you're going to do 7 times 60, which will be $420 to borrow that money for 7 years at 6% simple interest. Then at the end of 7 years, you'd have to basically give them back not only the original 1,000, but those $60 each year, which would add up to 420. And this idea, we can actually turn this idea into just a nice little formula for ourselves. And that formula that we can use is going to be this formula. I is equal to PRT. So what does each part mean? Well, I, that's the interest. So how much interest is actually accumulating? So that's what we've been calculating in all of the parts before. And how you're going to do that is you take the original amount, so that's your P value, and that stands for principal. So principal just means the original amount or the amount borrowed. Then you multiply that by the interest rate, and we need to make sure when we're multiplying it by that interest rate, you have that interest rate as a decimal. So usually it's given to us as a percent, convert it to a decimal. And the last part is T. So that's the time. Usually we're looking at years in the examples that we're going to do. Okay, so next, let's use this formula, do the same kind of question as before, but we can do it fairly efficiently. Okay, so if we have this question, Aaron borrowed $3,000 for 4 years at 5%. How much interest will basically be earned in that time? So we need to identify what each of these values relates to. So first of all, $3,000, the amount being borrowed. Well, that is actually the P value, the amount borrowed or the principal. So we can say P is equal to $3,000. Okay, next is the 4 years. 4 years, well, that's a time value. So we can just directly say T is equal to 4 years. Lastly is this 5% interest. So we can start off saying R is equal to 5%, but as I said, we want to convert this into a decimal. So to convert it into a decimal, divide by 100. So we're just dividing by 100. 5 divided by 100 gives you 0.05. All right. So if we want to use this formula, I equals PRT, what it's basically saying is these three values here are all being multiplied together. So we're taking P, which is 3,000. I'll write it in brackets so that we're multiplying it. Take the interest rate of 0.05, so the decimal value one, multiply that, so in brackets. And the 4 years, so we can just write 4 here and multiply that. So we're just doing 3,000 times 0.05 times 4. All right, and if you put that into your calculator, you should get an answer like $600. So hopefully that's what you got. All right, and that's a look at simple interest. One thing to note though is banks, they basically never actually use simple interest. So what we're going to look at in the future is compound interest, and we'll see how that compares to simple interest. But basically with compound interest, even more interest is going to accumulate. So instead of having something like $600 that Aaron would have to pay back, it would be maybe $800. It would be even larger. Because banks want more money. And we'll see what that's like, as I said, in the future. But for now, we're just going to stick with simple interest for these examples. Okay, let's take a further look at just time. What do we mean by time? So in the example above, we said that generally interest rates and the time we're looking at per year or in years. And so sometimes you might not be given something in units of years, so we're going to have to just practice converting from weeks, days, months, whatever it might be, into years. So let's just go through the process. So it's kind of laid out for you, but we'll write out these examples in full. So for example, what if we want to convert 45 days into years? So first of all, if you want to convert something into years, whatever unit your current thing is in, so if it's days, how many days do you have in a year? We have 365. Don't worry, you don't have to do the decimal value because of like leap years and such. We're just going to stick with 365. Then we want to write it as a fraction. So the given amount, the 45 days, that's on the top of the fraction. The bottom of the fraction is 365. All right. And then you could just do that actual division, because usually in the end, when you're using the simple interest formula, you're going to be doing like multiplication and stuff. So you don't need the thing as a fraction. And when you do that division, you're going to get something like 0.123. I'll just do it to 3 decimal points. And especially when you're dealing with, let's say, the simple interest kind of questions, you do want to maintain as many decimal points as possible. So you know what, I'm going to even go a little further to 8, and I'll round off at 7, so I'll round it up to 8. Because even the smallest difference at the end of those, when you get to large amounts of money, whether it's like tens of thousands, those extra decimal places can make a bit of a difference. Okay, let's do the same thing. So we're converting 14 weeks into years. So first, how many weeks are in a year? Well, there's 52 weeks in a year. Then we can write it as a fraction. So start off with the given number, the 14, over 52. And then you could do the actual division. And that would give you 0.26923 we'll go to. And sometimes it might be good just to save that division step when you actually are using the formula, so that way you're able to keep that exact number in your calculator. Okay, so these ones, they don't have the full steps laid out, but hopefully by now you see what we're doing. So take your given value, 73, and divide it by, well, in this case, days. So how many days are in a year? 365. There's what you want as a fraction. As a decimal, well, that actually works out nicely to 0.2 exactly. So it's 1/5 of a year. All right. How about 4 months? Well, take your number 4, divide it by in this case, the number of months in the year, which is 12. What's 4 divided by 12? We can reduce that first to 1/3. And 1 divided by 3 is the same as 0.33333, and so on and so forth. It just keeps repeating the 3's. All right. So in the examples that we've looked at, we've often been looking at interest, on loans and such. And in that case, interest isn't something we want. But there are situations where interest can be good for you. So something like an investment. An investment is where you put money away into some sort of account, whether it's with a bank, whether you're investing into a business, and then that money can grow in value through interest or through other means. And if you have that money at a good interest rate, if it's growing at a good interest rate, well, that's very good for yourself, because that means you're earning more and more money. And it works the exact same way as we've just done the previous problems. But now when we're calculating interest, this is interest that we want, not interest that we're, in a sense, trying to avoid. Okay, so let's just take a look at another problem where we aren't given a time in years. So Nate received a $2,000 scholarship. He wants to deposit that money for 9 months in an account that pays 8% interest per year. So the time, that's not in years, so we need to convert that time into years. And that's what we do with the above parts. So take the 9 months, divide it by 12, since there's 12 months in a year. 12 months in a year. And then 9 divided by 12, you could reduce that fraction, or you can just go straight ahead and calculate that out, and you'll get something like 0.75. Okay, so we have t, the time is 0.75 years. Okay, and if we're using the formula I equals PRT, we also need our value for P, which is $2,000. So that's the beginning amount. We're receiving that $2,000 scholarship. And the R value, so remember that's 8%. And divide that by 100. If you do that, you're going to get 0.08. So we have our three values. Now we can write out the general equation and substitute our values in. So where P is, put in 2,000. Where R is, put in 0.08. And where T is, that's what we calculated up above, 0.75. And when you go ahead and calculate that out, you should get something along the lines of 120. So in 9 months, Nate can earn $120 through the interest on that particular account. All right, there's one last situation we want to take a look at. So the last situation is, there might be times when we don't just want to know what the interest earned, but we might want to find out what the original amount is, or what the interest rate is, or the time. And that could be something like, maybe we want to know how much money we need to put into account right now, because we want to save for something like a TV, a car, a house, whatever it might be. And so having that original amount can help us to plan for the future. So let's take a look. So Toby's, let's say, saving for a new hockey stick in 2 years' time. He's really looking ahead to the future, and he wants to earn $80 in interest. So he found an account that provides 5% interest rate, and how much money will he need to invest? Okay, so we want to write down the given values in this case. So we can start off with the fact that we have these three numbers, so 5%, $80 in interest over 2 years. This time, the dollar amount, that is the interest we want to earn. So that's going to actually be in the formula, the I part, so 80. $80 there. I'm just going to write that to the side a little more. All right, the R, well, that's the interest rate. So that's going to be the same as before, so 5%. If you divide that by 100, well, that would be 0.05. And the last one, T is 2 years, so we don't have to do any conversions with that. We can just write it as 2. All right, so again, we want to just use I equals PRT, but we're just replacing whatever the letter is, so I, R, and T, with the values that we have. So we're starting with this. For I, we're now going to get 80. For P, well, we don't have a value for that, so that's going to stay as a variable. For R, well, as we saw above, that's 0.05. And for T, well, that is just 2. So that's what our equation looks like. So first of all, before we even try to do any solving, this 0.05 and this 2, we could actually multiply those together. So let's do that. So 80 is equal to 0.05 times 2 will give you just 0.1. So we just multiplied those two numbers together. All right, and you'll see we basically have some numbers and the letter P. So the idea in this is we can just solve this equation, 80 equal to P times 0.1. We just want to solve it for the letter P. So that means we need to move whatever's on the same side as P to the other side of the equation. So something like 0.1 here, It's being multiplied by p, so to move it over, we need to divide by 0.1. So you're going to have 80 divided by 0.1 is p. And so if you do 80 divided by 0.1, you will get something like $800. And so that's the amount you would need to put into the account. So therefore, Toby would need to put in $800, and he would earn $80 in interest in 2 years. So without doing anything whatsoever, just by simply having that money in an account, he gets a free $80. All right, and that's a look at the different parts of that investigation.